On Health Her Way, we're asking the questions you want answered about your body.
Together with our female healthcare experts, we're diving into the questions that might seem too scary, too silly, trivial, or taboo. No topic is off limits.
Join us as we talk about Health Her Way.
Welcome to Health Her Way. I'm Meredith Cunningham.
And I'm Brooklyn Elbert, and today we're joined by Keya Malhotra. She is a primary care physician, board certified in internal medicine and geriatrics, and she's been with Covenant serving patients at Grace Clinic for almost 8 years. She started in 2018, so we're super excited to have you here today to talk about our bone, brain, and heart health. So welcome.
Thank you, Meredith and Brooklyn, for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you all.
Tell us, for those of us listening and watching at home, say your name the right way, because it's so much prettier when she says it than when Brooklyn and I do. And so I want you all to hear it from her.
It's Keya Malhotra.
Yes, much better. So now that we've got you on the podcast, thank you for coming. We have some questions because as young women, this is a journey we're going to take, one of us closer than the next.
I don't know, with all the pains I have going on, my knee.
Brooklyn may not be approaching 40, but she feels it for sure. Yeah. I, on the other hand, am quickly approaching 40, and it's terrifying. No, I'm just kidding. And I don't want it to be terrifying. You know, I want to be happy about aging, and I want to be healthy. I have a 4-year-old. I want to be able to run around with him for a very long time. So that's why we wanted you here today, because full body, brain, bones, heart, you're going to help us feel our best. So, as women age, what are the biggest changes happening in our bodies that impact our long-term health?
Right. So you're at the right age to start taking the preventative measures. So we don't realize this, but our bodies actually start aging as early as 30s and 40s, and that change just accelerates as we age. And so, changes are happening throughout the body, not only in your brain, your heart, your bones, your muscles, all throughout all our organs, our kidneys. Everything is slowly declining, and then that just accelerates after 40s and 50s, especially after menopause. There's a steeper decline. And so, yes, preventative measures should be started early on to prevent that decline from happening.
We hear all the time about, especially when it comes to bones, like, oh gosh, my grandmother broke a hip, and everybody immediately gasps because it's supposed to be like, I don't want to say it, but kind of like a death sentence. And so, like, why is it important to start in your 40s taking care of your bones for something that you may not really be impacted by for decades?
Right. So our bones are actually deteriorating too, almost like about 1% per year after the age of 30. And so if we don't take enough amount of calcium and vitamin D, which are the building blocks of bones, then yes, our bones will start deteriorating. And the moment you hit menopause and you have that estrogen stop, then the bone loss accelerates much faster. And so keeping those bones strong right from the beginning would help prevent osteoporosis, and osteoporosis, which can in turn lead to fractures if you fall or injure yourself.
Okay. So you just mentioned osteoporosis. Can you explain a little bit more what that is?
Right. So osteoporosis means your bones become very porous and the gaps between those tissues become wider. So there's more air pockets, so to say. So, the bone becomes super fragile and can easily break in that situation. So we tested by doing a test called bone density, and the bone density measures your bone density compared to somebody who's younger, and we look at what we call the T-score. If the T-score is minus 2.5 or less, then that's called osteoporosis. And now if the T-score is between minus 1 and minus 2.5, that's called osteopenia, which is like an early precursor stage of osteoporosis. So we start doing that test after, ideally it should be done after 50, as soon as women hit menopause, but some insurances won't pay for it until the age of 65. And so, but the moment you're able to start getting insurance to pay for it, start doing it as soon as you hit menopause.
Why are women more at risk for bone loss and osteoporosis as they age?
So So, estrogen plays a huge role in maintaining
hormones. Dang it.
Yes, it's after all the hormones, right? So the estrogen maintains the bones, and then as soon as you have that estrogen stop, the bones start weakening. Estrogen is very important in working on stopping the osteoclasts. Osteoclasts are cells that break the bone down. So every day our bone is going through remodeling. Some bone breaks and some bone forms. So osteoblasts are the cells that make the bone, and osteoclasts are the cells that break the bone. So estrogen actually stops the osteoclasts. That's how it works. And so as soon as that estrogen stops, then the osteoclasts start working more, and the bone loss is more than the bone formation.
Does it happen more in women than men?
Yes, osteoporosis is more common in women than in men. The other reason for that is women have a lighter, more petite structure than men, and so their bones are lighter and less porous to begin with, right? And men have heavier, denser bones to begin with, and so yes, women are more likely to have osteoporosis.
You mentioned menopause a minute ago and how our bone density starts to really decline after that. Can you tell us some ways that we can support our bone health both before menopause to kind of prepare for that decline and after menopause?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, of course, calcium, like I said, is very important. So, dietary requirement of calcium is about 1000 milligram per day in premenopausal women. And after menopause, that requirement goes up to 1200 milligram per day. Now, you can get calcium through diet, and it is recommended to get it through diet, but that would mean having 4 to 5 servings of dairy a day. So, that's a lot of dairy, and most people aren't able to do it.
Brooklyn looked at me because I'm lactose intolerant, and I just about cried when she said that. Like, oh no.
Right. So people who are lactose intolerant can do yogurt if it is not cream topped, and so you are able to use that. But then, of course, if you can take lactose, then milk and cheese. People think a serving is a lot, but really it isn't. So a slice of cheese or an ounce of cheese or a cup of yogurt or a glass of milk is about one serving. So you count your serving, and you get about 100 to 200 milligram through all the vegetables and the whole grains that you eat. So even though people think like I'm eating a lot of spinach or I'm eating a lot of broccoli, that should be enough. That's usually not enough. Mm-hmm. So vegetables don't give you enough. It's usually dairy that's going to give you enough calcium. So yes, calcium is very important. Vitamin D is a part of it, helps in reabsorption and absorption of the calcium. So without vitamin D, your calcium is not going to reach where it needs to reach. And so you need both of those. And then the last and the most important is weight-bearing exercises. Mm-hmm. So strengthening exercises such as walking or Pilates or yoga. Yes. Or going to
Pilates girl, yes.
Yeah, or going to the gym. All of those are very important because that also helps redirect that calcium and vitamin D into the right places, and it knows where to put it. So yeah, if you do those three things, then you can maintain your bones pre-menopause and post-menopause.
For those who maybe are a little older than Brooklyn and I, strength training may sound a little daunting when you haven't ever done anything before, but you just said walking. So maybe like you build and you start from there. Is that like a great starting point?
Yes, that is a great starting point. So, anything where you have to hold the weight of your body is called a weight-bearing exercise. So a lot of people think we have to go to the gym and lift lots of dumbbells. Not necessarily. Even if you get down on the floor and do a plank or crunches or push-ups, even that is weight-bearing exercise. So against your own body's weight, squats, lunges, they're all weight-bearing exercises. And then as and when your capacity goes up, you can add some weights on top of that, but you could start at home.
I'm intrigued, and I've seen people like walking with the little ankle weights or the wrist weights. I kind of want to get some of those for my walks.
I wear a weighted vest and I have the ankle weights and stuff. I will say about 20 minutes and I'm you don't think 10 pounds is a lot or whatever, but after you've been doing it for a while and then I take it off and I'm like, oh my god, it's like when you take your ponytail out at the end of the day, that immediate relief, satisfaction. You're like, oh, all right. So neither here nor there. But okay, so bones we've covered. We feel good about our bones now, but let's talk about the other B word, our brain. So we've had some other experts on this season talking about how our brain goes through sometimes these foggy patches, especially in perimenopause and menopause. I still think it's because we as women have a billion things going on in our day, and we just are trying to help everybody all the time. But how do we keep our brain sharp and focused? And so blueberries, is that the right thing? That's what you hear. Blueberries are great for your, but that's probably not enough, right?
Yeah, so blueberries are great. They have a lot of antioxidants, yes. But believe it or not, at the end of the day, it's just basics for brain health, for heart health, for most things. So the basics are good food, full of vegetables and fruits, which add antioxidants, avoiding sugar, avoiding white carbs and refined flours. And, so that's your diet. And then comes exercise, and then sleep, which is very, very important for brain health, and then socialization. You want to make sure you're happy and not stressed and have a circle of friends. So those things help. And then also your mental work, like what are you doing with your brain? If you're sitting and watching TV all day, that's passive. Or reading, people think reading is a great exercise for the brain, but it isn't. So because it could be very passive, you may not remember a word after you read the book. So brain exercises, if you're in your working life, yes, you're using your brain every day, but after a while it gets routine. So you have to challenge your brain. Believe it or not, there's a study on Monopoly. Monopoly actually helps with brain health too.
I think I've heard that.
Yeah. So board games, learning a new instrument, learning a new language, learning new skills, all of those are things that you can do to stimulate your brain and keep going, especially after you reach retirement age and stop working.
Get me a bowl of blueberries and a board game for my brain. I can play Mahjong. Yes. Okay. That's a hard game. I have to really work
Me
about
too.
that one. That one stresses me out
Same.
a little bit. It's fun, but you have to pay attention. I need to play a different game.
Same.
So then it's working your brain.
There you go.
Which is great when I retire, but right now I have a lot going on. I need to knit or something mindless, right? So, I mean, is that something too? We've talked about exercise, but building something with our hands and stuff, is that also good for brain health?
Of course. Yeah. Anytime you're applying your brain to something new, and wherever you feel that, I have to think a lot, I have to focus a lot, that means you're using your brain. So anything new. But if you do the same, if a carpenter is building a safe chair every day, he's not going to have to use his brain after a while for that. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
So she mentioned brain fog, but what other changes happen in the brain or women's brains as we age?
So yes, after menopause, you hit that slow point where you have that brain fog, and estrogen does, now that we are finding through the Women's Health Initiative, there was a recent update on their studies in 2025, where they found that estrogen does have a role to play in preventing cognition and cognitive decline, basically. And so yes, that plays a role, but as we age, our brains are aging, and physiologically, just like all other organs, the brains are deteriorating too. But you have to differentiate between the aging brain versus pathological aging, which would lead to dementia. And so, definitely the risk factors are still the same. But once that tipping point is reached, then you can, you enter the dementia or the pathological categories of cognitive loss.
Can we expand on that a little bit? Because I think we make jokes about just how our brains are working, and they're fabulous, amazing pieces of our body. But we make jokes about, we walk into a room or I call her, I'm like, what on earth did I literally just picked up the phone. Why did I call you? But when does it get serious? What are those things that we start to notice that are normal versus no, you actually need to go ahead and be seen by an expert?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I get asked that a lot. So, if a patient comes to me and says, I can't remember anything, I'm forgetting, I don't remember names, they're less likely to be pathological than if their family member comes in and says, hey, they lost their way the other day and they don't seem to remember the appointments, then that's more likely pathological. So that's the one point, but it's not always true. If you're able to go back and recall later, then you're less likely to be pathological. Then it's more likely to be normal brain aging. So if you take a moment, hey, what did I forget? Yes, now you can remember, then that's more likely normal brain aging. With normal brain aging, you sometimes lose words, you like forget words or names. That's very common. Learning new skills gets harder. So learning new skills is again part of normal brain aging. That's harder. And, just focusing, because you can't focus on 20 things together. Like you can think of your grandma or, you'll tell them one thing, but then you have to wait until they process that. So the processing times of our brain slows down. So, those are some of the features that you see in normal brain aging. Whereas in Alzheimer's dementia or vascular dementia, you will see other changes such as problem with language, or you'll have a lot more short-term memory recall problems. So they won't remember recent events that happened or conversations that had happened, or they'll lose their way, which is usually a new early symptom in Alzheimer's. Like when they're going somewhere, they forget where they were going and land up somewhere else and not realize it, not have the insight.
So you've mentioned a couple of different ways that we can support cognitive health, great sleep, good diet, exercise, challenging yourself. But is there anything else specific that us women can do?
So not have stress. Very important. So women tend to deal with a lot of things, children, homes, work. And so stress builds up, and lack of sleep becomes part of that whole busy routine when you're younger. And that's not good. You have to prioritize having a good sleep because sleep plays such a huge role. When you're sleeping, that's when the brain clears all those bad proteins that accumulate in the brain. And so if you don't get your good 7 to 8 hours sleep, you're not refreshed in the morning. That means your brain didn't get to refresh itself. Gradually that's where it leads to more memory decline. So constant stress, anxiety, lack of sleep, those are things women should focus on, especially in their younger years when they're raising kids.
So if I want to live forever, if I want to tell my husband that if he wants to be married to me for a very long time, he has to stop stressing me out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
I will be sending him this podcast.
Our phones and screens we're just on them so much now. What impact do you think that's having on people's long-term brain health?
So definitely it's just passive again. It's just the amount of time you would have spent using your creativity or doing something new. You're using that same time in passive brain activity. You're just sitting on that phone and not using your brain at all. And so obviously, your brain's not being used during that time. And the longer those hours, the less likely, you're going to stay brain healthy. So that's why it's not good for the brains. Of course, it decreases attention span and all those things. But mainly for memory, I think it's not being used, especially for kids, where I know that if my kids are sitting on the television for 2-3 hours, then they're not using their brains. Whereas if they weren't, they would actually be doing something creative. They may end up using their brains, figuring out some games, something to do.
I will say as a book girly, I am very sad to hear that reading is not challenging enough, because I could sit for hours and read a book, and I would prefer to sit for hours and read a book and nobody bother me.
Reading is great for imagination, though. It has its own benefits, right? But when we're talking about cognition and memory, then probably not so much.
Dang it.
To be fair, it's probably better than scrolling on your phone. So
Probably. That's true. Probably better than watching,
Yes.
reality TV. But it's a balance, if I have been using my brain all day, sometimes I'm tired. I cannot simply think.
Yes, of course, we all need to shut off our brains for a few hours a day. I was just reading a book, The Happiness Hour. And so in that they say the sweet spot is 2 hours to 5 hours. So you need 2 to 5 hours of not using your brain, just relaxing, just, being able to do whatever you want for you to be the happiest. And so they've done studies on that. So there you go.
A lot of the information you've provided today so far on bone and brain are suggestions that we hear over and over and over again. Good sleep, exercise. But I think we've heard before with our cardiologist, those things are very impactful for our heart too, which, as you mentioned too, stress is probably one of the first things to be impacted, with stress is your heart. So let's talk about heart risks, especially for women as we age. What are we going to see? Hopefully not. Yeah. What could we see in the next upcoming decades?
So this is a misbelief that women don't have as much heart disease as men. It's not true. So women also suffer from heart disease almost as much as men, and sometimes even more. They may not present as dramatically though. So you know how with men you'd have a sudden chest pain and dramatic falling somewhere, and that might be how a heart attack presents or coronary artery disease presents. But in women you might have more subtle symptoms, and they often get ignored. So you may have fatigue, more tiredness, and you might be more short of breath on exertion or start having swelling in the legs. And you think like, okay, I was up on my feet all day, so I had the swelling because of that. Or, you tend to ignore those symptoms more. And so it's very important that we start screening for heart disease in women as soon as you notice any of those changes. And that's for doctors, but for patients, and they need to bring it up to their doctor and say, can you check me for heart disease? Because I'm noticing these symptoms, especially the fatigue. And sometimes it might just be even nausea. It could present with that, may not have a dramatic chest pain. So, yes, women should be screened equally and be watched for heart disease too.
Because heart disease is the number one killer of women, correct?
Yes, it still is, more than cancers, more than anything else.
All right, ladies, our hearts are too big. We care for too many people, but we get it checked.
Yep.
You talked about warning signs that may be overlooked. But what are also other risk factors that may impact a woman as she ages?
So obesity.
Okay.
So obesity is the number one risk factor for women. And not doing strength training like we talked about earlier. So that goes on adding more visceral fat, which is a big risk factor for heart disease. Especially in women, they tend to have more abdominal obesity and increased abdominal girth. They all are correlated to increased heart disease. And, of course, smoking and alcohol also increased risk of heart disease, along with the other things we talked about, diet and refined carbs and sugars and high-fat diet. So all of those things, of course, add to the risk of heart disease.
What are some simple, realistic ways that we can protect our heart health starting now?
Yes. So when you're younger, definitely exercise, walking is very important. So you have to get your steps, and nowadays everybody has these fancy watches, so it's easy to count your steps. And they say 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise, 5 to 6 days a week is plenty. So just going out for a brisk walk, and you can put on your headphones and listen to music, and it doesn't take too much. You can multitask, you can talk on the phone while you're outside. So get your 30 minutes of exercise, very important. So just go and walk, do a little bit of strength training at the end of it. That is the key. So multiple studies have been done, randomized controlled trials, all of them show that exercise is the one thing that can slow down aging. Mm-hmm. And when we say aging, of course, it's heart health and brain health and all of those things. So start exercising. So that I would say is the most important. And then, of course, focus on all the other factors. Don't smoke, don't overdo your alcohol, get your sleep, and get your stress levels under control. And diet, of course, diet plays a huge role.
Yeah. I saw an article the other day about how most people think like you have to get 10,000 steps a day to have a healthy heart, but really you can see benefits a lot less than that. So just starting anywhere is
right.
Good.
Exactly. I have patients tell me they get about 500 steps or 1,000 steps, and even for them going up to 2,000 steps, it would be great. Mm-hmm. So just increase based on your own capacity. Mm-hmm. Don't judge with others or compare with others. Just gradually increase your own capacity until you can get a good brisk 30-minute walk. When you have reached that level, that means you have enough endurance to help your heart. So.
I want to talk about having conversations. I was at a meeting yesterday, a community meeting, and all these older women were like, yeah, when we went through menopause, we just kind of suffered through it or whatever. But now it's much more of a conversation, and not just menopause, but any heart or things. Why is it important for us women to share with our friends, with our family, with those we love, what's going on with us? Because It could be happening in somebody else, or it may, make them more aware. But why is it important as women to have these conversations with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. You shouldn't suffer alone. There's no reason to. Everybody's going through the same story. So, it is important to find like-minded people of your own age group that are in the same life situation and talk to them. That really helps your soul. So journaling can help. Find some few trusted people. If you can talk to them, that's better than anything. So definitely.
So to wrap things up, if you had to narrow it down, what are the top 3 things women can do to support their long-term health? Which I'm guessing it might be diet, exercise, and something else.
And sleep. Yeah, you got it right. So yes, diet, exercise, and sleep. Exercise is number 1. Diet, of course, number 2, and then sleep, number 3. But yeah, all 3 are important. They go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely. And weight management. If you do all those 3 things correctly, you're going to manage your weight naturally. So at the end of the day, you'll prevent obesity, which in turn causes so many other problems.
Well, this is great. I'm a little less scared of turning 40. Not yet. I've got a couple of years, but I'm just getting closer, people. But it's a little less scary now. And so thank you for coming on and having this conversation with us, so that getting older doesn't have to be that bad.
Yeah, it isn't. If you take care of yourself, you're going to live a healthy, long life, and you'll do great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of Health Her Way. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to follow the podcast wherever you listen and share it with a friend.
If you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, connect with us on Instagram or Facebook at Covenant Health, and we'll see you next time. This podcast explores health-related topics with experts in their specialty for entertainment purposes only.
The information shared and discussed should not be considered as medical advice under any circumstance and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
The views expressed do not reflect the views of Covenant Health System. For questions related to your personal health, always contact your physician.